This is something that's been a debate among the Nintendo community since the Nintendo Switch launched, and that's whether or not we need a more powerful version of the system. Yeah, I mean, if you've been around since the jump, I mean, it was within the first year, certainly, that this was a big debate topic. People hoping to at least get, a Nintendo Switch Pro or something soon down the line, which never came. We got the Switch OLED instead. It's obviously always lagged far behind the competitors, trading power for the portable aspect, a trade that I'm totally down with, but it's getting to the point where it feels like this thing is so archaic that I feel it's holding back a lot of even exclusive Switch games, obviously third-party ones as well, to the point where we see so few on the system, and oftentimes with those third parties, you're paying full price for games that have been out for a long time, have been discounted, or cheaper on other systems where they run better. And I'm super ready for a Nintendo Switch 2, a Switch successor. I've already stated in past videos that I'm of the belief we'll get one next year, but I just want to discuss today why I think this thing is so necessary now. And if the wait is much longer than that, like if we don't get the Nintendo Switch 2 next year, if it's like 2024 or God forbid, like 2025, I think it would also not be a very good business move for Nintendo, especially when you consider it's kind of approaching critical mass in terms of sales. The numbers are starting to slow a bit. In fact, in Nintendo's latest financial report, the one that just came out this week, they actually had to lower their Nintendo Switch hardware sales forecast for this year, for 2022, which I am aware before anyone else says it, that the reasoning they gave for a lot of this stuff happening to their investors was due to the chips shortage that is ongoing. But yeah, I don't really see that as big of an issue for Nintendo as, say, the PlayStation and Xbox systems. In those cases, I do see like the supply issues, but I mean, have any of you seen like a Nintendo Switch supply shortage going on? Anyone having trouble like finding one? Again, this year, because that was an issue like back when this pandemic started and that, there was a shortage of Switches for sure. But this is, again, we're talking about fiscal year 2022. And even still, this isn't like Nintendo-doomed or anything like that. I just think we're getting close to that point where everyone who is going to buy a Switch has bought one. I think a price cut is something they can still do to bump up those numbers. But if you haven't been like brought in by the library of games offered up to this point, I don't know what else is going to sell you on this thing. And that's fine. I mean, it's been out for a while. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to start by saying, obviously, there are a ton of great looking games on the Switch. There are more continuing to come out, especially ones with simpler art styles. I mean, Kirby and the Forgotten Land is a strong Game of the Year competitor for me, just all around. And it is one of my favorite looking games that came out this year, but that's due to the just amazing design of everything. It's not exactly something that's pushing the hardware. I'm sure a Mario Odyssey 2 can come out and look phenomenal as well, but that's not exactly PlayStation Spider-Man, is it? And those games, the ones that are pushing the hardware, are where I'm starting to have more and more issues. I noted in my recent video on Bayonetta 3 that I felt titles like that and Xenoblade Chronicles 3 I brought up as well. It just seems like some of these games are pushing the system as far as it can go, and perhaps a bit too much. I mean, when you get, like I said with Bayonetta 3, when you have the frame rate inconsistent like that in a action game, that's a rough time. And when the exclusives have issues, that certainly irritates me more than others, because at that point, you're designing these games specifically for the Switch in mind, unlike, games getting ported over, having to make all these sacrifices. So it feels to me like these devs, they want to make games that are more demanding than what the current Switch can handle. Like, the thing that irritates me the most is the idea that these devs are perhaps putting up ideas for these exclusives. Maybe Xenoblade wanted some crazier, even bigger open zones. Maybe with Bayonetta 3, they wanted to do some even more over-the-top kaiju fights, but they were like, the game, It's already struggling on here, and we don't want the system to melt, so we're gonna have to tone things back so this thing doesn't just like catch people's Switches on fire. So that's one of the bigger concerns I have. Like, in the development of some of these games are cuts in that being made because the Switch can't handle what these devs want to do. In terms of third-party games, a lot of the ports we get, as with some of those more demanding exclusives, I think a lot of these ports are at the very least very impressive. It's an impressive feat for sure when you get some of these games running on the Switch hardware, the Dooms, Witcher, and that, but they're still rough. Nier Automata, which also came out recently, like Bayonetta, I mean, you want the high frame rate for these action-type games, and it's just not there. And Nier's got some textures on there, I'll be honest. They're like PS1 quality textures, not PS3 or PS2, PS1 quality. Still, the game is playable, it's still fun, but these sacrifices are getting a bit too heavy. And you still have stuff like Persona 5, which also recently came out, that because it's much slower, being a turn-based RPG and all, these sacrifices aren't as noticeable, but I still, even for a game like that, wish we could have it running like at a slightly higher resolution. Obviously, anything at 30, I'd rather run at 60, but you know, I can handle, if the 30 is stable, I can handle it, especially for an RPG like that, a turn-based RPG. But yeah, like the resolution, a lot of the detail in that you lose, especially docked, I think this is a big concern. Like when I play a lot of these games docked, even the ones that are better, if they're blown up on a big TV, they could use a bump. And sticking with the third party, I look at some of the third party games that do go through the effort of getting the game out on the Switch on the same day as other platforms, which I absolutely appreciate, but I can't help but think if things were more equal, that these Switch versions would be dominating. I think about something like Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker Saga. Awesome game. Again, came out the same day as all the other versions. And, you know, I feel like a title like that fits so well on the Switch. A system with, what is it, like 110 million unit install base. The sales on this system should be dominating everywhere else, in my opinion. I really don't think it should be close. Sonic Frontiers, actually, that's the perfect example because, you know, I'm old enough to remember Sonic Mania, the version that had like the DLC and that bundled with it. It sold like half, might have been over half of the total units when it first came out on the Nintendo Switch. So the Switch sales versus all of the other platforms combined was about even. So using a little bit of critical thinking, do you think that's going to be the case for Sonic Frontiers? Do you think it's going to be even close to that? If not, why? Are you going to try to argue with me, oh, well, that's 2D Sonic versus 3D, as if it's like a totally different audience or something like that? Like, give me a break. Because again, we're not talking about quality or amount of sales, we're talking about percentage. I mean, why would such an overwhelming amount of people be running out to buy Sonic Mania on Nintendo Switch, but not so much Frontiers? I mean, it's obvious. People are going to go out in droves to buy something like Sonic Mania on Switch because you're not going to get as many sacrifices. Whereas you look at something like Sonic Frontiers and people are going to go, oh, that's probably not going to run great on the Switch. But like I said, my biggest concern still has to do with the first-party games, the exclusives, feeling less impressive, or like I raised with Bayonetta and Xenoblade, perhaps, you know, they're making a lot of hard choices because of how dated this hardware is. You know, I was actually saying a while back that I thought it'd be a good idea to pair a new Switch with Breath of the Wild 2. Tears of the Kingdom, still getting used to that, because I could see that game having a sick upgrade, better textures and that, all running at like a 1080p, smooth 60 frames per second on new hardware. But either way, with it being built sort of on top of the original Breath of the Wild, I'm not worried about that one, you know, being released specifically for Switch. Obviously, I'd want it to get an upgraded version on the inevitable Switch 2, but, you know, I'm not worried about something like that being, you know, held back effectively by the Switch. But something like Metroid Prime 4, I am worried about it being held back, especially after all this wait. If this was the original version from when the game was announced back in 2017, that'd be one thing. The game would almost surely be out by now. But since we had the whole development restart debacle, which was in 2019, I think, it does feel to me like it could end up being a huge missed opportunity for it to be like an absolutely mind-blowing game if it is going to target the current Switch. Now, here is where I differ for some people, a lot of people on this topic. I feel like when we discuss this, like wanting the Switch 2 or, you know, sticking with the current Switch, I feel like there's a lot of people feeling like a game like this, especially when I'm talking about, you know, being held back by the current Switch, like that means it needs to be exclusive to the new Switch. Like the choice is either this is a current gen game or a next gen exclusive. Where no, I think Metroid Prime 4 should 100% be released on the current Switch, especially again after people have waited all this time. But I think a new Switch should be the target that they develop the game for, and you figure out how to chop it up, make it run on the current Switch. In terms of the whole current Switch, you know, is going to hold new games back, that really only makes sense to me if there are crazy gameplay like features and stuff that just, you know, AI or something that simply would be impossible for the current Switch. But it's like, look at all the beastly games we do have. Like I mentioned, Witcher 3. Was Witcher 3 held back because it was on the Switch? No. Not in the slightest, because it was fully developed with other hardware in mind, and then they figured out how to get it running on the Switch. You know, actually, the Doom games are really a lot better, specifically Doom Eternal. That's the one I should be focused on, because no one feels like that game was held back by the Switch, and it was being developed for both the Switch and other platforms simultaneously. Still, though, the other systems were clearly the target, and then they figured out what they had to do to make things run on the Switch. And that's actually also, I assume, easier to do. Like, when you know there's going to be this much weaker version from the start, it's probably a lot easier to figure out, like, what you got to do to get this game, what you got to cut in that to get the game running on the weaker hardware. Because I do believe this will be the case with many games in the early days, at least, of a new Switch whenever we get one. They're not going to want to just jettison, I don't think, the over 100 million Switch users that they currently have. But I think the key, again, with something like Prime 4, is I wouldn't want it, again, targeting the current Switch, and then when we do get the Switch 2, it just gets like a simple performance bump or something. Going back to Doom Eternal, I'd like to see, and this might be a bit controversial, I'd like to see Metroid Prime 4 release on a Nintendo Switch 2, and that being kind of comparable to Doom Eternal on, you know, the PS4 and Xbox One systems, and then the version of Metroid Prime 4 that we get on the current Switch kind of looks like a similar downgrade as Doom Eternal on the Switch. And that'd really be my hope with all the games going forward, that we're going to be cross-gen. Like, I do believe as long as the new Switch is like the target that devs are making the game for, you can bring a lot of the games over to the current Switch without, again, having that feeling like, oh, the current Switch is holding those games back. But when the current Switch is the target, in terms of a lot of these games that have come out so far, when the Switch 2 comes out, yeah, again, they might get like a little performance or resolution bump, but it's not like you're going to pop in Breath of the Wild and it's going to look like a totally new game on a Switch 2. So that's why it's like, I feel like I'd want to get the Switch 2 so that, again, that can be the target people are developing for. And also, in terms of third party, again, something that's been a thing since the Switch came out, there's just so many games that I wish we could have running natively on the Switch. You know, something that really pisses me off. Well, obviously the Kingdom Hearts games, but I think that's just bullshit in general, especially that 1.5 and 2.5 are on the Switch. But, you know, seeing something like the Resident Evil games. Resident Evil is my all-time favorite gaming franchise, and it just feels like a slap in the face. I see these awesome games. I mean, they've been killing it lately with, you know, your 7, your 8, the remake of 2, the remake of 3 also exists. But it's like, man, I really wish I could have those games running on the Switch. And then it's like we have to keep living this reoccurring nightmare where these types of games get teased in a Nintendo Direct or something. It's like, oh, what? Resident Evil? Yeah, coming as cloud games. And it's like, as I said, same with the Kingdom Hearts thing, which, oh man, every time I think about 1.5 and 2.5 just being cloud, I could hit somebody. Which brings up an issue the Nintendo hasn't had until very recently, because there is a way to play many of these big third-party games on a handheld hybrid. Yeah, you guys may be aware that there's another handheld hybrid out there that has been making a lot of waves lately called the Steam Deck. Now, in no way do I think Valve is going to take down my beloved Nintendo or anything like that, okay? But I think specifically many of those third-party instances is a bit worrisome, because a lot of these games that, for one, aren't playable on the Switch are playable on the Steam Deck. But I do, I get worried, especially as, of course, games are getting more and more demanding. Certainly once we start leaving the PS4 and Xbox One behind, it's like there's going to be probably no chance for a lot of these games to come over to the current Switch. But it's like I don't want the franchises, especially the ones that are still supporting the Switch, to start being like, if people want to play our game in handheld, they could just play it on Steam Deck. Because once more, let's be honest, a lot of these games probably could end up running on the Switch, on the current Switch, but these companies know that the sacrifices would be so great that people just wouldn't want to buy them. They certainly wouldn't want to pay the full price for a lot of them. And while the Steam Deck doesn't have any of its own exclusives, it does heavily benefit by the competition, Xbox and PlayStation, putting more and more of their games onto PC. Xbox has been doing this for a long time, but Sony is one I really have my eye on, because, they're putting stuff on PC like Spider-Man that I mentioned at the top of the video, God of War as well. These games, yes, they also come over much later, right? So it's not as big of a deal, but still, I think they're significant. And Valve does do a smart thing. They have this thing called Steam Deck Verified, where obviously, because there are so many games on Steam, it's not like they've gone through and made sure they're all optimized for the Steam Deck. So they make sure to check out a bunch of the games in their catalog on Steam Deck, put them through their paces, and put this little note on their store pages that they're, Steam Deck verified. If you want to play it on Steam Deck, you're pretty much good to go. They'll also put in little notes like, oh, well, you might need to use the touchpad keyboard or something to put your name in, stuff like that. But you best believe they make sure that the games like God of War and Spider-Man are Steam Deck verified as soon as possible. Also, in terms of the Steam Deck, there are other issues Nintendo I wish would resolve that go beyond power. I've got to admit, one of the things that irritates me so bad about the Switch versus Steam Deck is how many people are almost primarily playing on Steam Deck to play Nintendo games. I mean, how easy has it been for Steam Deck owners to farm likes on social media over the past year, just by posting a picture of their Steam Deck with the Wind Waker title screen on there? I mean, damn, if only Nintendo had a handheld that could play GameCube games, Game Boy, GBA games, etc. Maybe one day. I mean, just think about that. Being able to play GameCube games is the selling point of a Nintendo competitor. What a fucking joke. But again, that's not a Switch power problem. That's a Nintendo leadership incompetency problem. And once more, I don't think the Steam Deck is going to actually challenge Nintendo in terms of sales or anything like that. But its success is not something I would ignore either. But yeah, I want to cut myself off here before I drone on too long about this. I think it's definitely high time for a new Switch, and I'm hoping not only is it coming soon, I've said, 2023 is when I think we'll get it. I hope we'll get it. Let's get these games closer to on par with the competition in terms of visuals and performance. Let's make sure the first party, the devs making exclusives, can just go crazy. Doesn't have to be equal. Obviously, these games, they don't have to be running at 4K, 120 frames per second, but 1080p, 60 should be the standard, and you should be able to have some pretty demanding, crazy games running at that resolution and frame rate, and I think people would be totally happy with it. Anyway, with that, this video's a wrap. Let me know your thoughts on the need for a Nintendo Switch upgrade and Nintendo Switch 2 in the comments. Are you in the camp like me that's kind of feeling like we're seeing a lot of even the exclusive games feeling held back by the system? Do you think it's just fine? You ready to have this thing for another 3 or 4 years? And what would you like to see a Nintendo Switch 2 be capable of? As always, I'm the Shy Guy, Johnny Zakari, and thanks for watching.